All right, welcome everyone to this hearing of the Select Committee on Renewable Energy. We're going to begin, and I know that a lot of the members are scattered around at different committees right now, but I hope that as soon as they get a chance, they'll head on down. I may have to step out myself to go and vote, so I apologize to everyone for that in advance. Thank you. Well, now that we've done that, let me again remind members of the Select Committee that we are beginning the hearing now, and we're eager to have everyone's arrival here so that we can hear the important testimony that's going to be offered today on eligibility as a renewable resource. California has, as we all know, California continues to lead the world in its advocacy of renewable energy and its leadership in its renewable portfolio standard. And by the time that we're finished with our legislation this year, I hope that the worldwide lead will be extended even further. We have some of the best eligible resources right here in California. And there has been a long discussion, both in the creation of the existing RPS statute and now as we consider changes in the RPS statute about what should constitute an eligible renewable resource. That conversation has been ongoing both through separate legislation this year, such as that relating to waste to energy, AB 222, as well as indirectly through AB 64 and SB 14's consideration of transmission needs and pricing and other factors that impact on the availability of the resources that we have. We're going to talk today about both resources that are currently eligible as well as resources that are not currently eligible under existing law but have been the subject of a significant amount of discussion. And this hearing is in part an outgrowth of the governor's invitation to begin a robust dialogue about what should constitute a renewable resource under the RPS. That dialogue has been, until now, quite robust, but I think that this invitation by the governor gives us an opportunity to continue that dialogue in the transparent fashion that has become the hallmark of this Select Committee, so that we can bring people into the room who have different opinions, hear their best arguments, and consider what options may be available for California as we consider the best kind of RPS statute to advance. So we're going to begin with the first panel, which is a discussion of renewable options that renewable resources that are currently eligible. And I'd like to invite up Shannon Eddy of the Large Scale Solar Association, Donna Brownsey of the Solar Alliance, Phil Reese, the chairman of the California Biomass Energy Alliance, and Ellie Booth of Covanta Energy. Welcome. Ms. Eddy?
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, I'm here on behalf of the Large Scale Solar Association just to briefly reiterate who LSA, who and what LSA is. LSA is a group of utility-scale solar companies, and their technologies span both thermal and photovoltaic. And combined, they have approximately 5,000 megawatts worth of signed contracts with utilities in California. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and walk through the different technologies, and then talk a little bit about land use issues. It's a pretty long PowerPoint, and it's a little bit dense, so we may want to just kind of do the high-level stuff, and then if you have questions on some of the specific technologies, we can dive into that. First, want to just highlight the differences between what I'm going to be calling PV, which is photovoltaic, and solar thermal. And I'm looking at the bigger PowerPoint, just so you know, following along. I'm on slide 3. PV is different from solar thermal in that the electricity for PV is actually generated in the panel itself. Essentially, and this is the kind of thing you see on rooftops, and I'm sure Donna Brownsey is going to go into more detail about PV and its applications that people are more familiar with. It's only recently that the PV industry has really been looking at larger scale applications over 1 megawatt and into the 200 and 500 megawatt applications. Solar thermal essentially uses mirrors to collect heat, and that then reflects onto some sort of tube. That tube has fluid in it that then heats up a steam turbine, and then that generates energy, much like a gas plant does. Instead of using natural gas, it uses the sun to power the generator. The CSP industry has had an interesting trajectory. We haven't built a CSP facility in California since the 80s. On slide 5, you'll see a brief overview of essentially the only solar thermal facility that we've got in California. Those are the SEGS plants that were built up through 1991. They're still generating today, and it's clear that a CSP is very reliable. There are a lot of contracts for solar thermal in the desert, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. The technologies that you're going to hear in terms of solar thermal, the technologies you're going to hear about are fairly new. So while solar's been around for a long time, the solar that you're typically hearing about is PV. So towers, the solar thermal towers, parabolic troughs, the linear Fresnel lenses, and the Stirling dish engines, all of these are pretty new and haven't experienced a big commercial deployment yet, aside from the SEGS plants, which are solar troughs. Quick differences between PV and CSP are mainly in application. When you look at CSP and PV, Germany is the leader in the world in terms of the PV market, not because it's got the most sun, but because they pay the most money for the panels. And that tells you that PV can actually generate electricity in places where there's pretty diffuse sunlight. The difference then with CSP is that they use mirrors and they need the heat. And where PV doesn't operate so well in desert because while it's bright, it's actually hot, and you lose some efficiencies there. The thermal plants need the heat, they need the sun, and they need basically a cloudless environment. PV doesn't really use any water. Some facilities wash their panels maybe once a year for some of the utility scale applications. CSP, because they're using a power block to generate power, they essentially do need some water for cooling, similar to a natural gas plant. There are air-cooled applications as well, but the water differences are fairly significant between CSP and PV. Another difference is that PV doesn't have, at least yet, the technology is not at the place where photovoltaics are providing large-scale storage opportunities. CSP does have molten salt storage, which is I'd say just past the testing phase and in the deployment phase. They've done some recent projects over in Europe where they're experiencing, say, a 7-hour deployment on storage, which is pretty good, but it's still new and it's still under development. But that doesn't work with PV. It only works with thermal. So again, another one of the differences. The benefits of PV are that you can really drop it down wherever at any size. It can be 1 megawatt, you can do 10 megawatts, you can put it close to load, close to distribution centers, that kind of thing. It's a little bit easier to site depending on what kind of pedestals that they're putting the panels on. CSP, they need bigger economies of scale. It's going to be very unusual for you to see, except for some of the dish technologies, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to see CSP facilities that are less than 200 megawatts. And they get really good economies of scale at, say, 300 to 400 megawatts. So these are big facilities. Land use requirements. PV uses typically about 6 acres per megawatt, and it depends on whether or not it's crystalline versus thin film, and you have some efficiency differences there. CSP is not terribly different depending on the technology. It's anywhere from 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. And the land use requirements, these are just a couple of notes about what the insolation factor is, and that's the radiance of the sun hitting the ground. In order to site these things, and of course siting is a major issue that you've been hearing about over and over, you need lots of sun, and we're going to go through this in a second, and that'll tell you how we identify that. You need pretty flat area. And ideally, we want to put these things near transmission lines so we don't have to build too much new transmission. I want to pause for a second from this PowerPoint and then go to this one, the one with a colored map on it, because we're going to go a little bit more granular. As the solar industry is contemplating deploying the level of solar that's contemplated in READY and that's contemplated to meet the RPS, we need quite a few new facilities. And so what this NREL map does is each slide progressively takes away land. So the first one tells you the dark red is where the best resource is with transmission. You need over 6 kilowatt hours per square meter at least. CSP typically needs 7.5. And then you start taking away land for environmental uses. These are taking away parks and critical wilderness areas, that kind of thing. And then we take away more land for slope, 3%. And you actually need less than 1% slope if you want the perfect site. And it's this last slide that you really need to, that I think we all need to focus on, and where the state's really putting a lot of energy into, because it's really the dark red and the dark orange parts over just north of LA and to the east. If we're just looking at California, that we need to put these things. Yes, you can absolutely site any of the solar facilities, and PV has more flexibility. But in terms of solar thermal, you can site them anywhere, but it's going to be more expensive because you need more equipment, and you also take up more land to get the same power generation. So these are things that the READY process is taking into account. It's what the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan is taking into account. The BLM has recently released its study area maps for California and elsewhere, and it's also what they're contemplating. These really nice red areas here are the West Mojave. Those are actually some of the areas that are hardest to get to. You're not going to see them in the BLM maps, and you're probably not going to see them in the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Planning process. So I highlight siting simply because we must resolve the siting issues if we're going to be able to really get solar online at the level we need to meet the RPS.
If I can just clarify,
yeah, absolutely,
this last slide for a moment, because in your PowerPoint it says that 6.5 to 8.0 kilowatts per square meter insulation is needed, and that's everything that essentially is on this last slide. Everything that shows as colored
is correct.
Is within that range. So in other words, this would be the minimum insulation needed, what's shown on this map.
Yeah, and it varies for technologies. Photovoltaics can actually generate in these lighter yellow areas much more easily than solar thermal can. Solar thermal really needs about 7.5 kilowatt hours per square meter to operate at the kind of efficiencies that make the projects cost effective. Mm-hmm. And so those are the ones those are the really high points here on the map.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Environmental benefits, I think, are clear, and we are all familiar with the fact that solar is essentially a zero-emitting resource. In some cases with CSP, there might be a little gas firming or gas shaping on the power block, so there's a minimum amount of gas used. But essentially, solar is producing power when the grid needs it most, and it helps the state to offset the need to build new facilities. Mr. Chairman, we've got several slides after this. I don't know if you want me to walk through all the different technologies, or if you want me to just kind of jump to the end and we can talk a little bit about the contracts that are with the utilities right now. Yeah. On page 16, this is a list of the contracts that have been signed by the utilities in California to date. I don't have online dates on here because some of the online dates are still in flux, but this gives you a sense of the magnitude of projects that are in the pipeline. Everything that doesn't say PV is going to have to go through the solar thermal siting process at the Energy Commission. There are 3 in that process right now, the BrightSource PG&E project and the Sterling projects and one other that I don't know the name of. But they're working their way through the process right now. The PV does not need to go through the CEC process, and that's actually a good thing. They're operating at the local level in a pretty efficient way. So I'm happy to answer questions about this too, just so you have a sense. These are also going to come on in phases. I know the BrightSource plant is going to come on at first at 400 megawatts and then scale up from there. The same with Sterling. That's about it. I can go into much more detail, but I figured I should probably end sooner so I can answer questions that you might have.
On this last slide, when you're talking about the projects that are in the pipeline, can you talk a little bit about some of the variations among local jurisdictions in siting, where there are, whether there is a wide spectrum of ease of siting among different local jurisdictions?
Yes, and if you want real granular detail, I may pull up Darren Boughton from First Solar to talk about some of the experiences they're having with siting their projects. While he's coming up, what I will say is that the state, we haven't contemplated how to do this yet. The environmental community is still getting their head around how to site these things and really giving a little bit on some of the land use issues that they've been really successfully advocating for years. I think that any project is running into some interesting dynamics at the local level as the local agencies try to get their heads around it. So anyway, I'll let Darren maybe talk specifics about what they're running into.
And for example, just to put it into a little bit of context, there's been some suggestion of expanding the CEC's siting authority, making it exclusive or making it an option to go to the CEC or local agencies. And so I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts on those different options.
I'm happy to do a quick answer, and I'm sure Darren can add. The three projects that are right now in the Energy Commission siting process are all grossly delayed with no real permitting end in sight. And it's not, I won't specifically fault the agencies. I think they're understaffed in a lot of ways. And this is new. We haven't cited one of these things in 30 years. So they're figuring out mitigation levels and all kinds of different land use challenges. To add into that mix additional wind projects, additional PV projects, I think would create such a glut at the agency level that I think everything would come to a grinding halt. And unless Darren contradicts me, which he well may, I think things at the local level are proceeding pretty well. I know the wind guys testified yesterday in the governor's reorg hearing, or the ABX 33 hearing. That the wind siting at the local level is going pretty well. So I would say the same thing of PV, and then I'll defer to my colleague here and let him answer that too.
So would you like me, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to present first some of the issues that we might be encountering, or kind of address that, kind of the CEC siting issue, however you prefer to do it?
I'm kind of assuming one will come with the other.
Okay.
So
I think in terms of issues that we face, and I think this is going to be the same, frankly, whether it's PV or solar thermal, no matter who's siting them. Shannon mentioned, I mean, we're talking about going in lands where there's a lot of competing issues around species. We're talking about lands that aren't necessarily sort of the easiest to build on, so there are potentially some requirements in some cases to either grade land or compact land so that you can actually get the equipment out there to build. I think sort of representing the photovoltaic industry, we're sort of at a place where we have a little bit of an advantage in that I think in most cases our technology is a little bit easier to actually deal with from a site prep standpoint and a construction standpoint, where we might be able to be a little bit more flexible in terms of increased slopes, dealing with vegetation on the site, possibly being able to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we lay out our projects to address, let's say, wildlife corridors, et cetera. But frankly, I mean, those are issues that really do kind of come up at a pretty micro level, and I think everybody's going to be struggling with the same broad issue. Whether or not the CEC would be better at dealing with that than the local jurisdictions, I think there are probably some pluses and minuses for each of those situations. I think at the local level, you probably get quicker access. You have a lot more interest. You can get closer to the decision makers to be able to really kind of hammer out what the issues are and try to address those issues in a creative way. I think through the CEC process, you would do that as well, but I think it might take a little bit more time at that side. I think from a standpoint of dealing with stakeholders, I think from a perspective of the state having an overall plan of where these things should go and providing some direction that locals could potentially follow is probably sort of a good thing. if there are either best management practice or guidelines or whatever kind of the state can kind of propose for the locals, because frankly I don't think they have a lot of resources to sort of address that. We're still seeing on our project, the Topaz project, which we're under contract with PG&E. It's when built, it will be the largest PV plant on the planet, 550 megawatt plant. We're still having a lot of challenges, I think, at a disconnect level from the local folks at the Fish and Game level versus the people here in Sacramento who are looking at it from an overall policy perspective. I think our negotiations with kind of the top at the agencies is going pretty well, but still there's a disconnect in terms of what gets delivered down at the local agency offices. I think it's the same with BLM. I think it's frankly the same with the environmental stakeholder organizations. We have some environmental groups at the national level that are being somewhat supportive of trying to help us cite this stuff, but then when you get down to the local level, it is kind of a challenge. And frankly, I don't know that necessarily the CEC as a citing authority for photovoltaic projects would solve that. Like I said, I think greater state coordination and sort of a little bit of a roadmap would probably help long term. But in the short term, frankly, we're just going to have to get in there and hammer out some pretty creative deals if we're going to go forward, because there is sometimes significant local oppositions. And I'm only speaking from PV. I can't speak for wind. I know they have some other issues. We don't really have the visual issues associated with our projects. We're relatively low profile. Our total footprint's probably bigger than wind. So we kind of have some different issues. But the one thing I'll also say from a photovoltaics perspective is, Shannon mentioned it, we do have a pretty significant advantage on the waterfront. We are starting to see, we're involved in an area where there are 3 projects proposed, 2 PV and 1 non-PV. Issues of clearing land's a big one. Issue of being able to sort of mitigate for wildlife corridors is a big one, and water's a big one. And I think PV as a technology usually comes out a little bit ahead there. So we kind of get a pass. But in terms of dealing with species, we're still there with the other ones.
If there's further questions, we'll come back to them. But for the moment, why don't we move on to Donna Brownsey of the Solar Alliance? Well, I understand it has pictures.
I do, and I think you should have a handout like this. So Donna Brownsey, yes, with the Solar Alliance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Happy to be here to talk a little bit more about PV. I think Ms. Eddy and Mr. Boughton did a great job, I think, framing the issues and talking about the large-scale projects and who we are. Solar Alliance is an alliance of PV manufacturers and also system integrators and financiers. And the organization works with the state to adopt cost-effective solar policies and programs. You can see the little pictures which have sort of different applications. So you see residential, commercial, large-scale, and on the right side of the page are the member companies of the Solar Alliance. Today, I was going to talk about PV penetration, the fact that PV prices are coming down, the changing landscape of PV, large RPS PV contracts, and the utility-owned programs, and new technology and trends in PV. So as you can see on page 3, this is a two-sided presentation. Solar PV installations have been steadily increasing. We had a great report from the CPUC yesterday with respect to the annual CSI program assessment report, which found that the overall findings of the report demonstrate that the program is going well. California has just installed over 500 megawatts of solar PV at customer sites, and this is equivalent to one large power plant. And that was really what was one of the policy goals, foundational goals of the program. The annual rate for new installed solar capacity in California nearly doubled last year over the year before. So we went from 81 megawatts per year to 156 megawatts, a marked increase, 30 to 40% annual growth for the CSI. Even despite the challenging economic situation, installation data suggests that the CSI will likely install at least the same amount of megawatts in 09 as in 08, with 78 megawatts already installed through May 2009, and I think they also had their highest number of applications in the month of May. Hey, Mr. Hill. We're going through the handout that looks like this for the solar. It's right there, the Solar Alliance. You bet. And we're on page 4. PV prices are coming down. The CPUC report also found that prices are coming down for solar projects in the CSI. While the decline is modest, it found that prices on average were less in 2008 than 2007, and we expect that trend to continue. We expect to see, frankly, significant declines in costs, and we believe that this will be explained mainly due to volume increases. The most significant decline will be in the module price, but the industry is also looking at other efficiencies to bring down the balance of the system cost through deployment techniques and simplified installation. And on page 5, you can see a graph which shows that very simple economic transaction. On page 6, larger versions of the pictures that were on the front in terms of the different kinds of PV that is becoming very, very active in the marketplace. Residential retrofit, although new production homes has slowed because of the economy, what builders report is that they're all solar homes are the ones that sell faster than the non-solar homes. Commercial and public applications, particularly in the CSI, 75% of the CSI are commercial applications. The businesses are very active. And Shannon, I think, covered the issues associated with the power plants, so with the utility scale solar. One of the major shifts in the changing landscape of PV is that the utilities are looking at the PV technology as a viable option. And so there have been a number of very exciting developments in the last year. Many utilities have announced programs in our state, SCE, PG&E, and SDG&E, so all 3 IOUs have programs as a way to quickly install renewable technology without having to wait for the transmission upgrade. So distributed generation, as you have heard me say in numerous hearings on the RPS topic, distributed generation really is a great short-term strategy. The utility scale solar is an absolutely important and integral part of the California. We support the development of large-scale solar, but would draw your attention in terms of the flexibility of distributed generation. The CPUC recently approved a Southern California Edison 500 megawatt solar PV application for installation of wholesale solar PV projects on existing rooftops, and a PG&E has proposed a similar program for 500 megawatts as well as the SDG&E program. And you can see on page 8 the great articles that are being covered by lots of our newspapers in the New York Times in terms of this development. In terms of PV technologies, some of the significant trends are trackers that follow the sun. So the technology itself is really trying to maximize the ability of the panels to convert sunlight into energy. So we have tilted tracking, which increases the energy delivery 30%. And one of the systems that we're highlighting is the SunPower T20. You can see the picture there, which is able to produce 30% more energy. Some of the other really exciting, extraordinary technology is in other high-efficiency models, and one of our companies for solar, and Darren represents that company, or works for that company, has a fantastic technology, which is their thin film solar technology, which is uniquely capable of producing high volume, low-cost solar modules, driving solar to be a real economic solution to climate change and energy independence. That there's a number of technological trends that use this superior light absorption properties that result in higher output compared to the traditional silicon modules. And these panels can produce, and I think this is really important in cloudy and diffuse light conditions, such as dawn and dusk, and then it enhances the suitability of PV for high volume, low cost module production, and also, that the issue with respect to the intermittency. So really expanding the ability of solar to be technology and a energy source that can work for longer periods of time. And the last slide, you can just see some of the amazing changes. Applied Solar has these great roof tiles. You can barely tell that they're roof tiles that are solar panels on that last page 11. Also, some of the companies have colorless panels. If you go down to the San Francisco, what is it, like the Science Institute or the Academy of Sciences, thank you, Darren. If you go up on the roof, you can see that part of the roof are clear solar panels as well as the living roof. And it's very exciting because you not only get the light, but you also, those panels are producing energy. So all kinds of new products, all kinds of excitement out there in the market. And the most important is that as we grow the market in California, we have many more companies who are not only getting involved, but it's driving the innovation in the marketplace for all kinds of products, whether it's for distributed generation or for utility scale, for commercial applications, or for retrofitting an older home. And so we believe that the sum total of all of these things will drive down the price as the market stabilizes. The science and the innovation, though, are some of the most exciting aspects of this. So with that, I'll just close and be available for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Taylor, Committee? Thank you. Next presenter, I believe, is Phil. Yes. All right, you're up.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Phil Reese. I find myself the chairman of the trade group of the existing biomass industry. All of the biomass plants in California that are operating, plus several that are not at the current time. A number of years ago, I missed a group meeting, and I found myself elected president. And since then, we've had really excellent attendance. All of the biomass plants in California use the same technology. They burn wood chips to boil water to make steam, to turn a steam turbine to generate electricity. That brings up the logical subject of what is the waste wood or the wood waste that these plants use. It's generally in three categories. Agricultural wastes, which would otherwise be burned in the field. I think you understand that. It makes a lot of smoke. Our organization is currently in deep discussions with the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District to help them make progress on their implementation of the Central Valley burn ban by having the biomass plants take the agricultural residues that we currently do not take. The industry now has a capacity to take a great deal more than it does, and we're trying to work toward that end. A second category is the forest-related wastes, including mill wastes, forest thinnings, small non-merchantable trees, and in particular the wood residues produced by clearing in the urban wildland interface. We work pretty readily with fire departments, the Forest Service, and CAL FIRE across the state. The biomass plants need to take more of this because the forest thinning, especially from a fire risk reduction, is getting more important. A third big category is urban wood waste, which would normally be landfilled for disposal. The biomass industry should take more of that, especially to help the state comply with the oncoming increase in the landfill diversion requirements from the Waste Management Board. Now, in these three categories...
And what would that encompass? Does that include post-construction waste and those sorts of...
Oh, yes, sir. Everything from construction cleanup wood waste at shopping centers and housing tracts, broken up pallets, spools, waste from furniture manufacturing firms, people that make trusses, windows. There is a huge amount of wood manufacturing done in California that has clean cutoffs. And we do currently take quite a bit of that.
And post-demolition used lumber, would that be able to be used, or is that already, does that contain too many things that you don't want to burn?
At the moment, the separation cost to take out the old lead-based painted wood in demolition projects, the separation costs are too high. We can't afford to collect demo waste. Unfortunately, most people seem to put C&D together, construction and demolition. In terms of biomass fuel, they're entirely separate. However, separation could be done.
Okay, thank you.
Biomass is one of the renewable technologies that generates 24/7. It can be scheduled when we have a outage for maintenance. Our contracts require, in general, 6 months' notice to the utility, and they can really schedule that one. The next two slides are pictures of two of the larger biomass plants in California. The first picture slide is in Riverside County at the south end of the Coachella Valley near the Salton Sea. This plant takes about 90% urban wood waste as its fuel, and the other 10% is made up of virtually every agricultural residue in the Coachella Valley, citrus removals and trimmings that would otherwise have been open burned. This plant has eliminated open burning in the Coachella Valley. The final small part of the fuel for this plant is the bark beetle killed trees in the Lake Arrowhead Big Bear area that pose such a huge fire risk. If the Forest Service ever gets past the environmental litigation about harvesting anything in the forests, there would be a huge amount more wood available. The second photo is one of the larger plants at the north end of the state. This plant is just south of Redding. Its largest fuel base is forest-related wood, and in the top toward the left of the picture, it looks like a huge field of logs. That's exactly what it is. These are coal logs, have no other market value. This plant chips a lot of unmerchantable logs on site for use as fuel. Now, we've heard from the solar folks, they speak in terms of 200 or 500 megawatts. A large biomass plant, such as the two I've shown you pictures of, is 50. The average megawatt of all the California biomass plants is about 25. On the other hand, both of the two pictures I've showed you, these plants provide about 150 direct jobs. Now, 10 years ago, I heard a lot of criticism about, my God, a 50 megawatt plant that employs 150 people? We could run a 50 megawatt peaker on 3 people. Well, I view it the other way. This is a huge number of rural direct jobs. They're also green jobs. So I'm here to turn the definition around. These are labor intensive, and that's a good thing. Going down to the first slide, and I'm sorry I didn't number them, but the first slide after the pictures. Overall, the industry uses about 7 million tons a year of waste wood that has no other market or no other useful application. It would have been thrown away or burned or left in the forest to decay. Now, a relatively recent, compared to the length of this, the age of this industry, is the fact that, like other renewables, biomass-fired generation displaces fossil generation by the utilities. All the renewables provide that advantage. Biomass has one more that's equally large. For every ton of waste wood used as fuel, there is a true net reduction of a ton of greenhouse gases. Now, you might look at me and say, how in the world can that happen? Let me ask you what happens to the 7 million tons if the biomass plants don't take it. It's burned in the open or decays in the forest or the landfills. Both of those produce huge amounts of methane, which I'm sure you know is a much more serious global warming gas than is CO2. By the elimination of methane emissions from the alternate fates of disposal and burning that wood in a boiler which emits no methane, there is an additional ton for ton, a ton of wood we burned or a megawatt hour we generate, that's the same thing, eliminates an additional ton of greenhouse gas. That, at the moment, is entirely unremunerated. We are working with the Air Resources Board to try to have the biogenic nature of the greenhouse gases that are emitted when you burn wood, not a net addition of carbon to the atmosphere like fossil fuel combustion is. We're trying to have that recognized, and then we hope eventually counted as what are being referred to as allowances or offsets these days. We're making some progress. We don't know if we're going to get there or not. I'm going to skip the next 3 or 4 slides because they tell you in some technical detail what I just said. If we don't take it as fuel, it rots or decays or is open burned. There are 2 bar charts in here. I'd ask you to go to the second one in which all the bars go upward. That is the greenhouse gas avoidance by renewable energy. You'll notice that all the others but biomass are about the same. That is the displacement of fossil-fired generation by the utilities. The left one, biomass, includes the extra greenhouse gas avoidance by elimination of the alternate fates of disposal and the methane that would be emitted. In the Central Valley, the agricultural residues that are used as fuel by the plants in the Central Valley reduce the emissions of criteria pollutants. Those are the SOx, NOx, particulate matter, etc. David Crow, the executive officer of the San Joaquin APCD, refers to the biomass plants as stationary pollution control devices. And it is with his APCD that we are working at some mechanism to increase the intake of agricultural residues. And the only way that can happen is if there is a higher revenue stream to allow the biomass plants to get to and retrieve the ag residues that are currently too far, too difficult, must be separated, and we don't take right now and are being open burned. Now, I think about this point I want to say that when I'm talking about expansion of the biomass industry, I'm talking about two separate things. First, I'm talking about expansions of the existing plants. They have sites, they're properly zoned, they're connected to the electrical grid, they have a fuel supply infrastructure that could be expanded. Expansion of the existing plants. That is also the best way to do it under the current air quality protection regulations. It is possible to build a greenfield plant. It costs a lot more than to expand an existing one. So I'm talking about two futures for the industry. This next slide with the three pictures on the left says we are consuming right now about 7.8 million tons a year of wood waste or waste wood. On the left of the next slide, there's a bunch of dots on the map of California. The red dots are the operating plants. There are 33 of them, something over 600 megawatts, but they generate full time. So they're generating just about exactly 2% of California's electricity. The industry, however, is in decline because you see the green dots are idle and the open dots are dismantled plants. I guess at this point I'll introduce the important point. The crux is the revenue to keep these plants running, to enable them to buy the fuel. The fuel for a solar plant is free. The fuel for a wind generator is free. The fuel for a hydroelectric generator is free. The fuel for a geothermal plant is free. We're handling 7 million tons with a lot of people. Biomass is a relatively expensive generation technology. Under the RPS, since it started in 2003, the utilities between them have signed, I believe it's 15 contracts for new biomass plants. None have or will come online because they have been subject to least cost best fit, the NPR, and a general desire to keep rates low. None of those contracts has been signed at a revenue, energy sales revenue, high enough to either resuscitate a plant or build a new one. So there's a list of contracts that I keep very close track of. So the industry has actually been in decline. We had 53 plants in 91, we had 49 plants in 95, and we have 33 today. We would certainly like to expand some existing ones or build a few new ones. The revenue is the key to it, and I've summarized for you how we're working with the air pollution control districts, the Waste Management Board, the Forest Service, etc., to have that happen. It's the fuel, stupid. Remember that phrase? That's our problem. Right now, we get a small subsidy from the Energy Commission, a generation subsidy. That expires at the end of 2011, and it's quite small. It's paid for by the ratepayers. We have a federal production tax credit under the IRS Code Section 45 that expires at the end of this year. Virtually all of the existing biomass plants are under one of two kinds of contracts. One is SRAC, tied to the price of gas-fired electricity. SRAC is in the toilet, and those plants are operating part-time. The other kind of contract is a fixed price. Not fixed. It escalates at 1% a year. And with the costs going up at 3-4% a year, most of the plants on the fixed price, no, in fact, all of the plants on the fixed price contracts are in dire straits. The waste management benefits, the clean air benefits, the displacement of greenhouse gas, by avoiding the alternate to space. None of those are being remunerated at all for the biomass plants. I think those are the benefits: reducing the landfilling, reducing the forest risk, need to be remunerated. The governor has an executive order, SO 606, that says biomass to electricity should constitute 20% of the RPS, at whatever level the RPS is, currently 20%. Right now, we produce about 2% of the state's electricity. 20% of a 20% RPS is 4%. To comply with the governor's executive order would require an approximate doubling of the industry. Perfectly feasible with a small increase in revenue from some source.
And Mr. Reese, I think you attributed the primary responsibility or the primary problem to be least cost best fit and the existing NPR.
Yes, sir.
How would your industry be impacted by a procurement model based on just and reasonable analysis?
I think that would work. First, it works on non-renewable generation reasonably well, I think. Now, in consideration of is it just and reasonable, I think there should be some consideration of things like the deliverability characteristic. Is it 24/7? Is it schedulable or not? It should consider, is there a somehow hidden transmission cost associated with it? Now, biomass plants don't have a transmission problem. You truck the fuel to the biomass plants, so you put them near a substation. And they're not very big, 25 to 50 megawatts. Some of them could actually be interconnected at the distribution level in some few places. They don't have a transmission problem, so there's no hidden transmission cost. What I'm getting at is if the benefits that are provided by the different renewable technologies, and I don't mean to denigrate any other one, I'm the biomass guy here, were recognized in a just and reasonable determination by the PUC, I think it would work just fine. There's going to be competition if that door opens among the biomass developers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hill, any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Booth of Covanta Energy, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to talk a little bit about energy from waste or waste to energy. It's a technology that has been around for a very long time, and I'm going to skip right to slide 3 in the interest of time. Energy from waste meets 3 critical global challenges. We deal with the issue of climate change. 1 ton of trash that is processed at our facility or municipal solid waste reduced the equivalent about 1 ton of CO2 equivalents. In the U.S., Covanta operates about 38 of these facilities. Energy security. Renewable energy is available locally. Some of the things that Phil talked about that are similar characteristics to energy from waste facilities. We're often located in city centers where the municipal solid waste exists, and we're land dense. We don't need a lot of land. We operate best where the municipal solid waste exists. Finally, the jobs issue, a typical facility creates about 1,000 construction jobs over 3 years. Each facility operates with about 50 to 55 people. 1 ton of municipal solid waste, instead of burying it in a landfill where it's just left to decompose, bringing it to an energy from waste facility, you are able to generate for about 500 to 750 kilowatt hours of power from 1 ton of municipal solid waste. You are able to pull recyclable metals, about 50 pounds of recyclable metals, out of the municipal solid waste from the combustion process after it goes through there. And you reduce the original volume of the municipal solid waste by 90%. Moving to slide 4, the way energy from waste works is we partner with communities. In California, we partner with the County of Stanislaus. We provide them another option for handling their post-recycled municipal solid waste. So we're reducing their volume of municipal solid waste by 90% and also therefore reducing their need for landfilling. The technology of energy from waste is established and recognized technology. There's 2 new aspects of the technology which have really, over the past 8 or 10 years, have brought down our emissions levels, and it's called very low NOx system and carbon injection for mercury control. And on a further slide in the presentation, I kind of give you our emissions limits for Stanislaus for last year, and you'll see how low we are operating below our permit levels. We essentially convert municipal solid waste into clean, renewable energy. Every 1 ton of municipal solid waste, as I talked to you before about, creates about 550 to 700 kilowatt hours. And then we share the way we work with communities, and this is the case in Stanislaus. The county of Stanislaus gets 90% of the revenues from the sale of the electricity. We sell our electricity to PG&E. They get 90% of that revenue, and they use that revenue to fund their solid waste program. They also get 50% of the revenues from the recovery of metals, which were in metals, when scrap metal prices were what they were maybe 2 years ago, this was a huge issue, a great thing for counties. It's not an accident. In California, Stanislaus County has one of the highest recycling rates for a county at 61%. And as you all know, Stanislaus County is a rural county. For a rural county to have that kind of high recycling rate is impressive, as opposed to like Marin, which has 71%, but that's very dense and it's much easier, certain recycling programs. The reason Stanislaus County, and they will tell you, is because they've always had a consistent revenue source for recycling. They've had consistent curbside programs because this is a dedicated fund and it's not subject to general funds ups and downs. Moving on now to slide 6, I'll talk a little bit about the energy from waste process. I point this out to you. There is a difference between an energy from waste facility, which uses a combustion process, and a lot of the new technologies that you are hearing about is more of a conversion process. The two differences, I would say in the most simplistic form, is one combust it and one essentially you're melting the municipal solid waste. I'll go through our process on the energy from waste first. On the tipping floor, you'll see the trucks come in with the municipal solid waste. They deposit the municipal solid waste into the tipping floor. It is then taken through a grate bed system up through the combustors, and it goes into the combustors. Once the facility is started, it takes no additional energy. It self-combusts the municipal solid waste. That's a different scenario than on some of the conversion technologies. It's much more energy intensive to start it up. That's just one difference. So basically you take them through there. Essentially, like Phil said, you're heating up these boilers. It spins the turbines. We have the dry gas scrubbers and the lime and carbon added, the ammonia tanks and the lime tanks that deal with the acid gases and the mercury controls from this. And then you see the bag houses where it goes through before it goes through the stack. Cooling tower, it comes out. We have ash residue that is 10% of the volume of municipal solid waste. In countries around the world, especially in Europe, they use the ash residue for cement, for concrete, because it solidifies very well. The particles, even if there are any particles, are solidified in there, so it's not going. And landfills actually like the ash because it solidifies a landfill as well. So once it comes with the ash, it is immediately almost concrete once it comes out. The conversion, as I mentioned before, a difference between conversion and combustion is really on the upfront process. A conversion technology you are using there's different types of conversion technologies, but for just generalizations, you're using torches to essentially melt, for a better word, the municipal solid waste. So it's very energy intensive on the front. The back end is similar as far as a setup on there. I will take you to slide number 7, which talks about our emissions. There has always been discussions from the environmental community about our emissions, concerns about our emissions. And this is just kind of the top 5 that are constantly referenced: lead, cadmium, dioxin, and particulate and mercury. And you can see on the in the very far right-hand column, in most of these cases, we're operating at least 98% below our permitted level. This year's dioxin numbers are going to be even lower. We just finished our round of tests on that for 2009, and our dioxin number is going to be even lower than 99.2% of permitted levels. We're like 99.7 now. So we're almost at non-detectable levels on the dioxin. The dioxin number at our Stanislaus facility is lower than the Nippon Steel plasma facility that's operating in Udushinai in Japan. As you know, there's not many operating bioplasma facilities in the U.S. that have success, but there is one in Udu Chennai. So that just gives you a perspective. Mercury is down to 98.9% below our permitted level. And when we talk about the MAC limit, that's from the 1995 Clean Air Retrofit. A quick look at the international policy landscape on slide number 8. Europe has a very, very aggressive landfill directive. And in the EU landfill directive, it basically states that methane from landfills is a huge problem with regard to greenhouse gases. So in order to discourage landfilling, they've essentially put what's kind of a tax in addition to the tipping fee on landfill municipal solid waste that ranges from $65 a ton to $100 a ton, depending on which European country you're in. Germany, UK are in the upper ranges of near $100. They have in the landfill directive is a 65% reduction in landfilling of biodegradable municipal solid waste. So huge composting activities going on in Europe, especially in Ireland. And I've talked about the landfill taxes. Currently right now in the UK, I just asked our UK office this, there are 17 RFP proposals out for energy from waste facilities in UK facilities. We've just cited a energy from waste facility in Dublin, Ireland, where it's in Dublin, the city of it, handling the municipal solid waste. One of the reasons for this motivation of growth in Europe is because energy from waste is recognized as an eligible offset or an eligible CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, under the Kyoto Protocol. So non-signatory countries can use build an energy from waste facility and count it towards their Kyoto goals. Most recently, the World Economic Forum in Davos identified energy from waste as one of the 8 emerging clean energy sectors, including wind, solar, and energy from waste. And I'd be happy to provide that report to you. That was just out in February of this year. The next chart, slide number 9, gives you a little bit of a sense of the where energy from waste is very popular. You see in Asia, especially in Western Europe, the percentage of their municipal solid waste that's recycled, and then the percentage that's landfilled. And you can see countries like Denmark and Sweden and Netherlands, very little of their municipal solid waste is landfilled. In fact, in Sweden, they get about 48% of their heat, because energy from waste can also do electricity and the steam can do the heat, from energy from waste facilities. So very, very low landfilling that occurs in other parts of the country. This was just a recent EPA presentation by a gentleman, Rick Brands, who in May, it was just in early May, who talked about how he'd just been around countries looking at other solid waste programs that other countries around the world have been doing, and came back to conclude the U.S. landfills too much material. He talks about the reality is you either recover energy or you put municipal solid waste in the ground where it generates gases. He talks about how it's not energy recovery versus recycling, it's energy recovery versus landfilling. There's lots of discussion sometimes in the environmental community that energy from waste facilities will somehow hurt recycling rates. And if you look at the evidence in all the counties across the country where there is an energy from waste facility, you'll see there is a correspondingly higher recycling rate than where in counties that there's not. And that's for the reasons that I talked to you about before, how the revenue is shared. He kind of ends his presentation talking about how we need energy, we don't need landfills. And finally, on slide 11, just highlight how energy from waste can be an important contributor to an RPS. By no means will we ever be a large portion of our RPS, because we're not talking about our facility in California is only about 23 megawatts. It's a small amount, but it's handling 243,000 tons of municipal solid waste every day from being landfilled. We run 24/7, so we're a nice complement to the other renewable technologies. We've talked about we manage 1 ton of municipal solid waste in an hour versus 100 years in a landfill. We're an engineered process with continuous combustion controls, dedicated air pollution control equipment, and incredibly strict permitting levels. Landfills do not have the permitting ability or the permitting requirements that we do, nor do they have the control requirements. We can tell you there is a computer in our facility that reports directly to the San Joaquin Air District, and we monitor our air emissions on 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 3-minute intervals, 15-minute intervals on every 150 conditions are in our permit. We generate more net electrical power versus municipal solid waste than any landfill process. You'll often hear landfills talking about landfill gas combustion engines, why those are, a good choice. You're talking about they're only getting 65 kilowatt hours per ton of waste versus 520 from energy from waste. We also avoid 100% of the methane potential from landfills. Even if they're capturing some of the gas through an engine, they're still landfill emitting. And I think I'll just end. California policy and RPS policy, previous RPS policy, prior to this point, favors landfilling over energy from waste. If you think about it from a logical, landfill gas is renewable. If you take municipal solid waste, bury it in a landfill, limited ability to control the emissions in the gas, that's renewable. But if you take energy from waste and you bring it to a facility where there's combustion controls and ability to recover metal, it's not. So that seems a little bit, from a policy perspective, kind of difference in there in California. So
Okay.
that's what I have.
Thank you very much. The chair of our Utilities and Commerce Committee, Mr. Fuentes, has a question, and if members don't mind, I'd like to keep questions on this panel kind of brief, because I've just been told that there's a chance we may be called down to the floor shortly, and I very much want to make sure that we get into our next panel before that happens. So,
Great, thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. Can you spend a little time telling me a little bit about the models that work? There's a lot of concern of whether, or rather, a lot of concern about the fuel that's necessary to create the process for waste conversion. Do you need the heat content that, for example, it's available in recyclables? I mean, is this a post-sort thing where you can really screen out most recyclables? Can you spend a little time?
I can talk a little bit about that. Conversion is a different technology than energy from waste, because conversion needs the heat input. It's a much higher heat input needed than one of our facilities, because we have the municipal solid waste constantly fuels the boilers. So we're at about 1,800 degrees. Conversion technologies, you need much higher degrees, so you'll need heat input. You'll need things in that process that are higher heat inputs. If you look at, I can speak to the facilities in Japan to answer your question, like Udo Shinai, which I referenced earlier, the Nippon Steel and Udo Shinai, which is one of the only successfully operating, consistently operating plasma plants. What they use in that is auto shred. They use auto shredder that, and they also use they bale their plastic. They have a different view of recycling that we do in the U.S. In Japan, and that is some recyclables have higher content being used in a conversion type technology than being recycled. So I can speak to the issue that, yes, they need more heat input. They need products going in there. A conversion technology, a plasma technology needs...
Versus your process.
Versus our process. We don't, if you pull out, because combustion, it's a different technology on the burn side.
And you mentioned a little bit about dioxin. That's another thing that is of great concern. Can you, in your process, can you explain how much of that, if any?
Well, on slide number 7, I don't know if you're here, I can give you our numbers, and I'd be happy to provide you in further detail. But essentially, if you're looking through, it's the dioxins are pulled out through the scrubbers and through the injected carbon that's in their system. I can't speak, I don't know the conversion technology and how the dioxin works, but I can tell you that the operating facility in Japan at Udo Shinai, run by Nippon Steel, our dioxin levels here in Stanislaus are lower than their dioxin levels in Japan. The challenge with conversion is not that one day it won't be a ready technology. It's just there's not any proven track records of it. We have 20 years of data to show you what our emissions levels have been, and that hasn't existed there. With the torches, you have the challenge of them burn out quickly, so you don't have consistent running operations.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions for this panel, members? All right. Thank you all very much. Among the current eligible resources under the RPS is what is often referred to as small hydroelectric power. power from facilities that generate 30 or fewer megawatts. There's been a great deal of discussion about what types of hydroelectric power, other than that, if any, should qualify as renewable under the RPS. So I'd like now to discuss that topic further. Panel made up of Fong Wan, the Senior Vice President for Procurement of Pacific Gas and Electric, Robin Younger, who's the Associate Deputy Minister of Environmental Assessment Office of the Province of British Columbia, and Keith Nakatani of the Hydropower Reform Coalition. Welcome. Why don't we begin with Mr. Wan?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Krikorian, members of the Select Committee, for the opportunity to come here today. My name is Fong Wan. I oversee energy procurement at PG&E. That means I oversee all of the purchase of electricity, natural gas. Of course, the most exciting is renewable energy. And what I'm going to do is start with an overview of PG&E's hydroelectric system. We have the largest investor-owned utility hydroelectric system in the nation. That means we have 26 separate FERC licenses. We operate 68 powerhouses in the major watersheds within the Cascade and the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. At its peak, we can generate up to 4,000 megawatts, and on the average, we can serve about 10% of our customers with hydroelectric power. And out of the 4,000, about 300 is RPS eligible, and of the 68 powerhouses, about 41 powerhouses are RPS eligible. And our largest facility is the Helms Pump Storage at over 1,200. That's right east of Fresno. Our smallest facility is the San Joaquin Unit 1A. It's less than half a megawatt. So we have a lot of experience operating the hydro system. We're also looking for additional incremental efficiency within our units. In other words, we're trying to generate more electricity, more efficiency out of the very same water. We've been very supportive of Assemblyman Blakesley's effort in that area over the last several years. Today, we appreciate the effort to talk about the opportunity to expand our commitment to renewables, as well as our exploration of potential renewables coming from the province of British Columbia. We view this as a significant opportunity for the state of California, as well as customers we serve in Northern and Central California. I'd like to step back several years to give you a picture of how this all got started and what led us to determine the potential benefits of California as well as our customers. It was at the direction of the California Public Utility Commission that PG&E began a study. We began a study in BC on what kind of available renewable resources are there, as well as what we think the costs are, and the third is how is it we will bring the renewables down to California. During the study, that's when we gained our confidence. There's a lot of potential there, and that we would like to move forward. Last summer, June of 2008, we submitted a report to the CPUC. Basically, he said that British Columbia has a large amount of potential renewable generation that is well in excess of what BC needs to serve its forecasted load. This report has been submitted to the committee, and this report also came at a time when BC government was establishing a policy of energy self-sufficiency, that also they were interested in leading to an export of renewable energy to the United States. For BC, exporting energy to the United States is not new. It is also not new for them to export to California. The way the structure is formed is there's a crown company, which is a government electric company. It's called BC Hydro, and it has a marketing arm called PowerX. Most of the transactions that we buy south of the border are through the marketing arm PowerX. And a lot of our supplies in the Pacific Northwest, as well as California, come from BC today. In fact, we have a very interesting and very positive relationship with the Northwest. In general, California hits its peak load in the summertime. That is when we typically import power from the Northwest, including BC. And in the Northwest as well in BC, their peak load tends to be the summertime. That's when we ship our capacity and energy up there. It's been an extremely helpful relationship in both directions, both southbound as well as northbound. Our studies show that there are 4 sources of potential generation: wind, biomass, geothermal, and run-of-the-river hydro. I want to emphasize that we found a good variety and not just one. Our study also looked at ability to deliver that power into the load center, and I'm going to address that in a minute. So while we were submitting our CPUC study in the summer of 2007, the state of California also signed an MOU with the province of BC. And the 2 themes are very consistent. I personally began a process in working with PowerX as well as the BC government to explore what is it we can do as we move forward. We talked about a number of things. The 2 most important topics that we talked about were, 1, the availability and the qualification of RPS or GHG emission standards. So we wanted to make sure we really understood the resources and how it applies here. Second is that what kind of commercial arrangement would work for them as well as how it will work for us. And as well as the long lead time that it takes to build this transmission all the way from BC to California. Happy to say that last summer, PG&E and PowerX co-signed a letter agreement that committed both companies to explore and evaluate the structures of a possible future commercial arrangement. And that would be only in the best interest of both jurisdictions. And we're currently in the middle of these discussions. I want to turn quickly to how we plan to deliver that energy. I believe you have this map in front of you. This is a map that shows the 3 states as well as British Columbia at the top. If you see the map, there's a wide band that goes all the way from the international border to close to the Bay Area. And I apologize if you don't have that. But it's a 40-mile band that stretches all the way down, and that is the path that we are studying. It goes across the eastern sides of Washington and Oregon and enters California in between the Central Valley as well as the Bay Area. This effort, I want to stress that this is an initial study. By no means are we anywhere close to completion because we all know how hard it is to build transmission within California. This will cut across 3 states as well as 1 province. This initial study is a collaborative effort between PG&E, Pacific Corp, Avista, as well as British Columbia Transmission Corporation, and other entities are also considering to join into the process. This is a 500 kV line. That means it's one of the highest rated capacity line, and it's bidirectional. And again, I want to emphasize that we have the ability to import power, and as well as at times the ability to export our excess renewable power northbound to meet their winter peak demands. Our initial cost estimate of this transmission line alone is in the neighborhood of $4 to $7 billion. It will employ a workforce about 1,500 trades, and we are hoping to get this online by the year 2016. So one thing that we often get asked is if this transmission line is for renewables. I want to stress that if we cannot enter into a commercial agreement with BC or the Northwest, we will not be building this transmission line. Our goal is to import clean energy into California only. This is clearly an ambitious effort. It has a lot of hurdles in front of us within PG&E as well as many of our colleagues. We have a large team working on this. We believe it has a significant upside for our customers, California, and the environment. I want to conclude by emphasizing what this project is not. 3 things. It is not about sending California ratepayers' money out of the state with no benefit for Californians. In fact, I see this as a significant benefit to bring green electrons to customers in California. It also has the ability to provide a significant boost in employment, not only in California, but also in the Pacific Northwest. Second, it is not about avoiding California environmental laws or doing elsewhere what you can't get away with within California. PG&E's environmental standards will not allow us to do so in the first place. Secondly, you are going to hear very shortly, and you are going to see that BC takes great pride on its spectacular natural resources and a population that demands nothing less than stringent environmental protection. 3, this is not about PG&E putting all of our eggs in one basket. I'd like to show you, I hope you have this map in front of you. This is basically this is a list of the various renewable contracts that under my oversight that we have signed to PG&E. There are tens and since I gave that sheet to you, I think there are 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts, about over 50 plus contracts. You will see that the vast majority of those contracts are all located within California. And we also have contracts with every single resources out there. So our objective is to build a diversified portfolio that cut across technologies, including the photovoltaics you heard about earlier, as well as the CSPs, as well as biomass. And in fact, we wish they all can be successful, because the more they can be successful, the more they can bring down the cost to Californians and improve our environment. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for the invitation to come before you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wan. Mr. Berryhill has a question. Mr. Smythe and Mr. Berryhill have questions. Okay. Mr. Berryhill.
Well, I want to thank you for coming here today, Mr. Wan, and my question has to do with rates and how much the cost is with this new, the CPUC has mentioned that it's obviously going to cost a lot of money to invest in this. And they've also said that you can expect a 7% rate hike. And we kind of get that, but I'm just interested from your view, how much is this going to impact PG&E and the rates as we move forward with this project?
It will increase rates because California in general is in the process of retiring older, less efficient gas-fired plants. So I think the right comparable is not against existing rates and existing plants, is really against a new combined cycle, state-of-the-art gas-fired efficient power plant. And I think if you compare it to a state-of-the-art gas combined cycle plant, a new plant, I would probably say in terms of the generation component, we're looking at in a neighborhood of 20%.
Wow.
I mean, to achieve the 20 and the 33% goal that we really would like to achieve.
Yeah, that's expensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wan, as you just mentioned, the 20% or 30% goal that we're debating and discussing and trying to reach. I mean, it seems like this is, the project that you've laid out here. I mean, going from 2 countries, 3 states. I mean, is that what we're going to have to expect from your company or other utilities? I mean, to actually try to meet those goals. I mean, are these the lengths that we have to go to reach those standards? I mean, that's because it's obviously pretty. The workload is pretty heavy.
My view is that to really tackle global warming and to really have the GHG emission achievements that we will be able to accomplish, we need to look under every rock and turn them all over. And we need to look in every direction, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, and also learn to share our resources. And that's one of the themes that we have, which is to export when they need it and import when we need it. And the best way to share electrical resources is on a seasonal basis using the same electrical capacity.
And just to follow up, I not knowing, really the politics of Washington and Oregon, but certainly here in California, the difficulty of the transmission, lines, getting the approvals. I mean, is that a similar challenge in our neighbors to the north in Washington, Oregon, or is it an easier, because that's the concern is obviously, if we can, get these projects and you sign the MOUs and you're moving forward, but if you can't get the transmission through, I mean, how is that, have you found there in other states?
Well, and if I might even put a finer point on that, since you're projecting about a 7-year timeline, I think, to get this online. How would the approval process within Washington and Oregon compare to California's in terms of duration?
We put down 2016. That's because we actually got started with this project 3 years ago. So we had a 10-year perspective, and we've been working very extensively on this. As to whether it will come online in 2016 or not, I think that's really our aggressive wish list. I would just want to be really realistic with that. To the question as to what do we expect to happen in Washington, Oregon, and BC, I think these two states and one province, along with California, are probably at the top of the list in terms of respecting due process, respecting to make sure all the communities are comfortable with us proceeding. And that's also the reason why we carved out a 40-mile band. I passed out the map really to show that 40 miles is really, really wide. And we would like to be able to work with each of the communities and each of the states. But the key to really being successful is to have the home state utilities, such as Avista, such as Pacific Corp, to be partners in a project. PG&E or California cannot build a transmission line cutting across other states or other provinces without the home state utilities being part of the project. We think that's a recipe for success. With that being said, it's still very challenging because we are going to have concurrent processes that we need to pass through every single jurisdiction.
Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wan, you talked in the follow-up on Mr. Berryhill's question, the 20% increase in cost from the renewables are based on this hydro. Is there an economy of scale? I guess you're limited to 30 megawatts. If you were to increase that coming from BC to California, would that or could that lower the price of the cost? Absolutely.
I think the difference between 30 and 50 megawatts, according to our study, which I don't have off the top of my head and it's been submitted to this committee, is pretty substantial in terms of how big a net do we cast. Mm-hmm. I really think that will bring down the cost.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Wan. And Mr. Younger, welcome to the hearing. Welcome to California. Happy Canada Day. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Today is Canada Day.
Today is Canada Day. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to speak on the issue of environmental assessment and regulation of hydroelectricity in British Columbia. That's a topic that I've been asked to speak to. I'm going to speak from the perspective of a regulator and try and provide you with information about the assessment and regulatory process that applies to these sorts of projects in British Columbia. And I'll be doing so in relation to an act that I'm responsible for administering as the senior civil servant in relation to this act, and that is the British Columbia Environmental Assessment Act. I'm also going to speak about some other provincial legislation that's administered by some of my colleagues that's also relevant to these projects, whether our Environmental Assessment Act applies or doesn't. I've given you a slide presentation with an attachment, and I'll just start going through the slide presentation if I may, and I'll comment first on slide 2 just to set the context a bit. I had these pie charts prepared to provide a indication of the amount of hydroelectric production or capacity available within British Columbia, and the pie chart on the left shows the existing capacity, production capacity. The dark shaded portion, which is more than 3/4 of it, represents capacity from BC Hydro, the Crown Corporation that was referred to earlier. And BC Hydro owns and operates a significant number of projects, including some of the historic heritage dams, large projects from decades ago, etc. The light portion is capacity that exists from other producers, not British Columbia Hydro. And that would include a number of sources. It includes some companies that produce electricity as part of their operations and sell it back to surplus back to BC Hydro. It includes independent power producers and run-of-river producers, if you will. And they're a relatively small portion. I think, I'm just estimating here, I think roughly 1/6 of that light blue would be those type of projects. The pie chart on the right shows both in magnitude and in distribution what things will look like when the projects that are presently under construction or have been approved but have yet to be constructed will be developed. So you can see that there's a bit of a growth in overall capacity and a slight increase in the percentage attributable to the IPPs. So I'm just turning to slide number 3, which talks a little bit about, at a high level, the environmental assessment and review process and a few points that I'd really like to convey. First of all hydroelectric projects are subject to quite extensive regulatory review and approvals, up to 50 approvals for one of these projects, including various processes, but the main ones being under the Water Act, which deals with licensing of water that's owned by the Crown, the province. The Land Act, which deals with use of Crown lands for transmission lines or to put a powerhouse on, etc., and the Environmental Assessment Act, which I administer, and I'll talk a bit more about each of those in subsequent slides. But there's a number of other laws that I think are really worth noting. They include things like the Wildlife Act, the Fish Protection Act, the Heritage Conservation Act, the Water Protection Act, and those are at the provincial level. There's also quite a number of significant and relevant federal statutes, including the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the Fisheries Act, the Species at Risk Act, and the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and there are many more, but I'm just highlighting those as some of the key ones, and to illustrate the breadth of subject matter that those regulatory processes cover. I think you can discern them from the title. For all of the projects that are reviewed, whether it's through our office or one of our sister agencies, an environmental impact statement is required. We have significant processes for involvement of the public, of First Nations, stakeholders, local governments, and federal and provincial agencies. And there's a transparency of decision-making through posting of information on the internet, through the hosting of open houses, etc. I'll speak to a bit of this in some more detail. The Environmental Assessment Office, which I run, has something called the Electronic Project Information Center, where we have all the relevant documents concerning a project review available for the public. There's thousands of documents on there, and you can find that on our website. So I'll talk first about the process under our act, the Environmental Assessment Act, and it's set up on page 4 of the slides. There's a diagram that explains it. This legislation applies to generally the larger projects, and it applies not just in hydroelectric, it applies in transportation, it applies to mining, waste management, a variety of things. In the transportation context, in the energy context, the Act and supporting regulations say that as a general rule, projects over 50 megawatts need to be reviewed under this particular piece of legislation in addition to others. And projects under that, as a general rule, do not. I say as a general rule because it's important to read that regulation with some of the other powers in the statute. I have the ability to exempt a project that otherwise triggers that regulation if I feel there's no significant adverse effects that are likely and the proponent can demonstrate a case to be exempted from that review process. Conversely, the minister has the ability to actually order a project in, even if it's below the threshold. And similarly, proponents have the ability to actually opt in, to come ask us to go through our process. And it does happen, even though it takes a fair bit of time and can cost hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars to go through the full-fledged environmental assessment process. We have people coming to us and saying that, we find it a well-run, well-coordinated process. It brings all the different agencies together. We feel that what comes out at the end gives us solid footing to move forward with communities of interest and others. So we do see projects opting in. Last year I approved an opt-in for a project that had several run-of-river projects each of which was under the threshold, but all operated by one company in one general geographic area. We had discussions with them. We said it makes sense to opt that in and consider that and look at the cumulative issues that come from the 4, sub-threshold projects. I believe that BC is the only jurisdiction in Canada, the only province in Canada that has a dedicated environmental assessment office, as we are, although I know that other jurisdictions certainly do different forms of environmental assessment. So the chart, I won't go through in detail because in the interest of time, but there's a few things that I want to highlight. First, there's a pre-application stage and an application review stage. And when I first got involved with this organization, I thought, geez, there's a lot of stuff that happens before you even apply. There sure is. There's a lengthy pre-application process. And during that, the scope and procedures of an environmental assessment are set out. And we also engage and direct the proponent to engage in public consultations about their project on the EA itself, to go out and ask people, hold open houses and say, what do you think are the issues that need to be studied before we even do the studies here? And we have to approve those. We refer to them as terms of reference. They're the information requirements that have to be presented to us before we even examine the project. So the proponent goes out, does all the studies, does all kinds of baseline studies. Typically that takes a year, 2 years to do. And they'll submit an application to us. We will have further open houses and public consultations. This is all up on the web. And throughout that, there's a technical group made up of different levels of government, First Nations, our provincial government agencies, and they're all providing input, trying to address issues and find ways to solve concerns as we're moving along. And people bring their concerns. We try and facilitate resolution, ensure that there's adverse effects mitigated wherever possible, avoided wherever possible. It often results in significant changes to the project. Sometimes the process results in the project not proceeding at all. I think roughly 1 in 6 or 7 of the projects that come into our environmental assessment process doesn't come out the other end. People, when they see there's a significant problem, they're not likely to get through. They don't necessarily continue to spend a significant amount of money to get through the process. At the end of the day, my staff prepares an assessment report, and I give recommendations to my minister and another minister, it'll vary on the subject matter, as to whether to approve the project or not from an EA perspective. If it doesn't get a certificate, the project can't proceed, can't even apply for any permits from provincial agencies, and can't operate the project. If it does get the certificate, then you get to go into the permitting phase, the detailed permitting phase. A lot of the work that we've done, of course, is relevant to that, and it's not like completely replicating 2 processes. The next slide deals with the Water Act and the Land Act process, and this would apply to projects that are below the Environmental Assessment Act threshold or we otherwise didn't order in or opt in. It's a very similar process. It's not quite as structured in some respects. It doesn't, for example, mandate 2 open houses or public comment periods, but as a matter of practice, officials can hold open houses and do so when they consider appropriate. This is all available on the website. There's regional teams of interagency teams that are involved. There's First Nation consultation throughout. Public's invited to comment throughout. So in many respects, the process is similar. Turning to slide 6, that slide addresses some of the key factors considered, and there's dozens and dozens of factors considered in any of these things. But in relation to hydroelectric projects, some of the main ones are protection of fish habitat and ensuring minimum in-stream flows. That's always a significant issue and something that warrants a lot of care and attention in the reviews. Protection of wildlife. What about impacts on roads, transmission lines? What impacts may they have? Protecting riparian zones to make sure if you're building something adjacent to a creek, how do you ensure that that there's no damage to riparian zones? We have to work in very close concert and in consultation with our First Nation communities, whom we owe a constitutional duty to consult and accommodate as appropriate. And we address cumulative impacts. And in many of the independent power projects, run-of-river projects that are in our office at present, the review is actually bundled. It's not one individual generating facility. It's a number in a particular inlet where they're proposing to bring that forward. There's a picture on slide 6 which shows you one of the applications. One of the proponents sent this in to us when they sent in an application. In this case, it was a mining proponent, but similar principles apply. Just the application that's presented to the Environmental Assessment Office, you can see it was taller than, when piled up, was taller than his daughter, and he thought that was a good way to show us how much work they had to do to put their application together. Slide 7 talks about the results of the reviews, how many get approved, how many don't get approved. I've indicated in the Environmental Assessment Act process, roughly 1 in 6 or 7 doesn't proceed. For independent power projects generally, if you look at water license applications to the province, in the last roughly 8 years, there's been 149 applications that have been abandoned or rejected, and there's been 72 that have been issued. That's not to say all those will actually be built and come to fruition, but at least they've got their license. There's various types of appeal and judicial review for all of these decision-making processes. Certain of them can be appealed to a Supreme Court, and in our case can be reviewed in Supreme Court by judicial review, the Environmental Assessment Office. We've had a very limited number of judicial reviews in relation to our process, and we have never had a successful judicial review. Courts have never found our process to be wanting when challenged. I want to talk a little bit at slide 8 about the outcome when approvals are granted.
Before you move on to that, on the review, the appeal process, if a license is issued, who would have standing to appeal that?
The standing on the Water Act license is, I believe, limited to certain people that those are most directly affected, and I think, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I think it involves neighbors and people that would have property over which, say, a line may be routed, to get access to the creek, whatever. In addition to whatever appeal rights exist, in that case, to the Environmental Appeal Board, I think it is. There's also general rights of judicial review. Parties can go to court on judicial review and ask the court to intervene, not on the basis of a merits of the decision, but on the basis that's either been unfairly reached or is wholly unreasonable. Okay. So there's a variety of those.
Thank you.
In terms of what happens at the end of the day, what is the outcome? Slide 8 seeks to address that. I think this is a very important thing, if I may say, relative to the issues that you are considering in terms of the substantive standards of BC environmental assessment and regulatory processes. If somebody gets approved through, say, the EA process, they'll get something like this document that I've given you in your materials. It's an Environmental Assessment Act certificate. It's appended to the slide presentation. This is a public document. It's just one particular project that recently came through. It's certainly a public document. It's on our website. And it sets out the process. This is a 50 megawatt facility. Interestingly, it really started out originally as an 80 megawatt, and some concerns were identified, and they rescoped and shaped the project several years later down to 50. Still going through the EA process. Sets out the process, but what I want to ask you to turn to, if I may, is a table at the end. The table at the end sets out a number of commitments that are legally binding on the proponent. When we go through these processes and concerns are raised, we ask for a response from the proponent. We endeavor to make sure it's satisfactory to us, and we make it legally binding if the ministers issue a certificate. I obviously don't have time to take you through all these, but you'll see there's many on a wide range of subject matter, environmental, social, otherwise. For example, commitment number 4 says that they will meet a certain minimum in-stream flow at all times. Commitment number 8 deals with tail race final design, making sure that when water returns back into the stream, it's not having an adverse effect on stream banks, etc. There's a requirement for a mitigation and compensation plan. There's extensive requirements on construction. There's requirements that certain things not be done at certain times, like helicopters not to be used at certain times when there's ungulate, breeding occurring, or that construction won't occur during nesting periods. All of these things you can find in here, some fairly detailed examples. I won't take you through them, but I did want to leave that with you, and you could find those and any of our other documents on the website. So the water license may contain similar conditions. Water licenses, the processes that don't involve the Environmental Assessment Office, address many of the same environmental issues, but they may not have the same scope in terms of socioeconomic, health, and heritage. We look at all of those under our process, but the environmental conditions of a water license can be very similar to many of the things that I've just talked about. I won't spend too much time on the last 3 slides. I just want to highlight that they set out a couple of the key policies that the province of British Columbia has adopted, the BC Climate Action Plan and the BC Energy Plan. By statute, I'm obligated to have regard to, general provincial policies. And the Climate Action Plan, I think you're familiar with and has some similarities to California's policies. The BC Energy Plan requires the province to continue to have at least 90% of its energy produced by renewable energy. And we're a partner in a whole number of initiatives that California, I think, is also part of, including the Western Climate Initiative, Western Renewable Energy Zone Initiative, Pacific Coast Collaborative, etc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Younger. And I'm sorry that I'm hearing now that we're going to be due back on the floor in about 7 minutes. So I'm going to stretch out my return to the floor as long as I can, but we may lose our other members, and I want to make sure that Mr. Nakatani has a complete opportunity in those 7 minutes to respond to this and provide other comments about BC Hydro and changes in hydro eligibility generally. So, Mr. Nakatani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll have to speak fast. I think that as far as the hydro issues are concerned, the issue is, and in previous PG&E testimony, they spoke to it directly, and I think they spoke to it indirectly today, and that is there was a statement that BC's laws are as protective as the environment as California's. Now, in listening to Mr. Younger's testimony, one would think that, what's the problem? It sounded like a very rigorous process. The question, though, is, as Mr. Wan testified, they submitted a report to the CPUC in June of last year, which analyzed the BC project. Now, in that report, it said things like, and I'm quoting, BC run-of-river hydro facilities would not be qualified as RPS-eligible resources in California. It says BC run-of-river hydro facilities would not meet any of these criteria, meaning California's regulations. It also says the key obstacle to project success, which means importing BC hydro to California for RPS eligibility, is that must be modified by legislation is the definition of new small hydro generation. So there's a very strong contradiction here, I think, between the testimony that is being given and the picture that is being painted that BC's laws are no problem, that they're going to protect the environment, yet PG&E's proposed amendments are to basically weaken California's regulations. Now, the way they are proposing to weaken the regulations is what's required now is that out-of-state hydro must meet California regulations. What PG&E is proposing, as I think Mr. Wan would agree, is that instead of California regulations being used, that the regulations of the locality where the hydro is produced out of state be used instead. In other words, BC's laws. The other thing that they are proposing is to increase the size criteria for out-of-state hydro from the current 30, that is obviously California's, to 50. So there is a disconnect between what is being presented and what the actuality is. I'm gonna make some. Okay, and then in PG&E's report to the CPUC, when we saw this report and we picked out these things, we thought, my God, why are they sending this information when they're admitting that the BC projects would not meet California regulations? Here's what they've said as a rationale for why they are proposing it. It may be argued that a different stream flow requirement and an increase in the maximum capacity limit, meaning increasing from 30 to 50, may be warranted due to different circumstances in British Columbia. Now, we found this statement to be astounding because there are, in fact, very different conditions in British Columbia. As everyone here knows, the situation on California rivers is that our rivers are highly compromised, largely due to hydro. Now, we're not making a judgment call about PG&E's hydro. Obviously, hydro is a very important part of California's energy portfolio. But the consequences of those hydro facilities are very impaired rivers. Every one of our rivers is impaired except for the Smith River up north. And the result of that is reduced flows and, of course, the salmonid crisis and other native fish species crisis that we're experiencing. So on to specific things. PG&E is also touted a letter from Mr. Younger's boss, Bruce Penner, who has claimed that information provided to the legislature by our organization and others is inaccurate. He especially took exception to something that I testified to when I said that PG&E's projects would dewater rivers. In his letter to the legislature, he said a project is not permitted to dewater the river in British Columbia. I think Mr. Younger is familiar with the East Montrose project, in which the project proponent was wanting to divert 95% of the stream flow. Now, in the Environmental Assessment Office assessment, it responded back to the proponent, which is Plutonic Power Corporation, and it said, the Ministry of Environment is concerned that the proponent is proposing in-stream flow releases that are substantially lower than the minimum flows recommended in the BC in-stream flow guidelines. Plutonic Power responded back to the ministry that their project was not economically viable unless they were able to divert the 95% of the water. The Environmental Assessment Office then ignored its own guidelines and approved the 95% diversion. Now, we are told by credible sources in British Columbia that this is common. 85 to 95% of stream flow is diverted. Now, to give you a picture of what a project looks like, the term run-of-river is being used very loosely because it implies something that's benign. But as a PG&E hydro person explained to me, what a run-of-river project actually is high up in a watershed you have a dam where there is an impoundment of water. You have a pipe, which is called the penstock, which diverts the water off the stream to a powerhouse, which then generates the electricity. The distance between the diversion, the dam, and the powerhouse can be miles. And that stretch of river in between those two is the part of the river where the water is being taken out. Now, Mr. Penner may be right that, 95% is not dewatering a river if you define dewatering as bone dry. But I think everybody else would consider 85 to 95% to be significant dewatering. Another exception to Mr. Penner's letter was received and sent to the legislature by Jim Abram, who is a BC local elected official, former president of the Union of BC Municipalities, which represents 184 local governments in BC. Mr. Abrams said, I would like to draw your attention to the misleading, incorrect, and deceptive comments that you have received from the Minister of Environment for BC. He also says, Mr. Penner, mentions that local governments are consulted in the consideration of run-of-river projects. This is absolutely wrong. We have had our regulatory powers stripped from us. He goes on to say, the BC provincial government, quote, took away the power of local governments to enact land use regulations with regard to run-of-river projects when they passed Bill 30 in 2003. Land use planning is part of our mandate. In this particular use, we have had the mandate removed in a bill, effectively hidden in another bill regarding utilities. He also says, there's another bill. I was there at the implementation of Bill 30. It is aimed at eliminating community input into the development of our resources. It follows on the heels of Bill 38, and I've attached analyses of that bill as well. That greatly weakened BC environmental laws, which eliminated the environmental review process for any project under 50 megawatts. Now, Mr. Younger has said that they have the ability to require or to compel projects to undergo that. But basically, one of the things that Bill 38 did was it made projects under 50 megawatts, the environmental review process, voluntary. And we all know what voluntary means. And so I go on to quote, effectively allowing projects that had the potential to be dangerous to our environment to be pushed through on a fast-track basis for the profits to a few with the impacts to many. Now, the other thing that is, very convenient is PG&E proposing that the size criteria be increased from 30 to 50 megawatts. Well, obviously, it's because of this change in the bill. There's also other evidence.
Mr. Nacton, I'm sorry, before you move on to the expansion of the size, I just want to give a heads up with my most profound apologies to the members of the third panel that we are, in fact, being called down to session like right about now. And so we're going to have to postpone the third panel to another date. I'm terribly sorry about that, but I wanted to let you know that. But I do want to let Mr. Nakatani finish. And my apologies and thanks to the members of the third panel. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's also additional recent information from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation that says, quote, inspection reports and emails obtained by CBC News show that BC government officials have raised concerns about environmental infractions during the construction of the rapidly growing number of run-of-river private power projects in the province. This includes sloppy construction that could damage streams and overcutting old-growth forests. There's some other things, too, I didn't want to put in the laundry list. The Vancouver Sun also has a similar article that says that some independent power producers are ignoring environmental regulations aimed at protecting old-growth forests, wildlife, streamside habitat, leaked BC government documents suggest. Now, there's a clear difference in opinion between the evidence that I'm providing and what Mr. Younger is saying about the rigorous environmental review processes. Now, in the larger perspective, what's happening in BC is that BC privatized their power development several years ago. I'm not sure what's behind it, but, you know, I mean, developing project, of course, is big money. And now what's happening is that there has been a wholesale submission of permits for projects, run-of-river projects. Virtually every river in BC has a permit for a run-of-river project. Now, not all of those will be developed, I'll grant you, but there is no type of overall process to determine what is the best type of projects to move forward with. It's just wholesale try to get things approved. So we submit very strongly that it is not true that there will not be significant impacts in BC from development. Far from it. It's the opposite. There will be tremendous impacts. BC rivers are in a pristine condition, not like California's. So any type of development is going to have significant impacts. One other thing. We're also hearing, and this doesn't, I don't think, relates to PG&E. One of their people told me that they're not behind this, but we also hear that there is a proposal to increase the size criteria for existing hydro projects. So I don't think this is talking about the BC projects. I believe that this is for in-state. To increase the size criteria from 30 to 50 megawatts. Now, we don't like this for the same reason we don't like the 30 megawatt criteria, because size is not an indicator of environmental impact. There are some much larger projects that are well operated that have much less environmental impact than so-called small projects. One very good example is the Klamath project. We all know the impacts of that project. That is an RPS-eligible project. That has huge impacts. Now, we have been very reasonable. I mean, we're reasonable overall. I think Mr. Wan knows, and he testified that they are looking to increase the efficiency from existing generation through Mr. Blakesley's bill, AB 809, 2 years ago. We worked very closely with PG&E and Mr. Blakesley to get that approved. We thought that was a good idea. Squeeze more energy out of the existing operations as long as there is no increased environmental damage. So if there is a reasonable proposal put forward, we're willing to work with folks on it, but we'll stand the ground on things that we think are totally unreasonable. On the one last thing, on the potentially reasonable side, we went to PG&E and said, look, we're willing to talk to you about removing the size criteria altogether if those large projects over 30 megawatts and are then environmentally certified. Now, we don't know if that's a good idea or not. We're willing to explore it. We think a feasibility study needs to be done to assess whether that's good or not. Surprisingly, the PG Hydro folks were very skeptical about that. They thought that, you know, projects that had recently gone through FERC relicensing had got as much environmental benefit as possible. We strongly disagree. We think that there is opportunity to get additional environmental impact if it's cost effective and you guys get RPS eligibility for large project, I think it meets both needs, both increased RPS eligibility and improved environmental benefits. Now there could be a downside, and I think that's what the feasibility study is needed for, and that is if a number of these large projects are then RPS eligible, what does it do to the RPS program? Does it discourage the development of new renewables, which of course RPS is about? So we think that's a downside.
I know there's some questions, Mr. Berryhill.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Nakatani, for coming up here today, and sorry that we're going to have to cut this a little bit short. I'm going to give you just a kind of a what-if here, and then a question behind that. But if we were to bless all the eligible renewable resources from BC, and given that this bi-directional transmission line was built, my question to you is, what would you like to see, and what would give you a little bit of comfort, I guess, that this Small Runner River hydro that we're talking about here would not harm the environment of BC?
I think that's a good question. I think the answer is very simple. Use California regulations. Why are our regulations good enough for us, but not good enough for use outside of the state? It doesn't make sense. Another perspective is, Mr. Krikorian, as you started out saying, California is the world's leader. California is also the nation's leader in environmental protection. I don't think we want to